Delia, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
I am so excited. We kind of became, social media friends, maybe like acquaintances. Yep. We're in a handful of different groups on Facebook together. And so that's how I got to know a little bit about you and the church that you work at. And I was like, ooh, she's going to be great to have this conversation around multi-site churches, launching a campus, launching a church plant, all those fun and wild and crazy things. So why don't you kind of kick off this conversation and tell us a little bit about you, about how you got started in kids ministry and where you're currently serving.
Yes, and thank you so much for having me. I first have to, before I jump into talking about that, I just have to say thank you, Lauren, for your leadership in the kids ministry world and how you invest in leaders and those who are impacting the next generation. Just a little caveat, you are doing a book club and a bunch of my kids directors just jumped into it.
Yeah.
And it was so great to have that resource that, they were able to get some development and grow in their calling because of what you're offering. So thank you for all you do in the kidmin world.
Thanks.
So a little bit about myself and how I ended up in kids ministry. So I actually started as a teacher. Growing up, I always wanted to be a teacher. I felt called to be a teacher and taught for about 10 years, elementary school, so kindergarten and second grade, and then helped develop curriculum for our school district, got my master's in curriculum and development, and also had a certification for special education, and really just felt called to helping kids with learning disabilities and all of that to be able to be successful. And so did that for about 10 years, and I was about to get my principal certification and start that process, and we found out that we were pregnant with twins, we had a 2-year-old at the time, then got pregnant with twins, and we're like, this is amazing. We had prayed for another baby and we got blessed with 2.
Yeah.
So it was an amazing time, but also a time that kind of rocked our world because, the plans that I had were not the plans that God had. So we, at the same time, my husband, Sam, had some connections down here in Tampa. We had lived in Pennsylvania at the time and had some connections here at Radiant Church, and they kept talking about how awesome it was, and they're really making an impact. So he does production, technology, all that stuff. He came down and was helping with some events for Radiant, and ended up being asked to come on staff to oversee production. And at the time, it seemed wild, but we prayed about it. God was very clear that this was our next step. So I left the teaching world. We had our twins. They were a month old, and we moved down here to Florida. He jumped on staff. I stayed home for a little while, and then eventually felt the itch to get back to teaching. I tried teaching again, and the grace had lifted. So, anyway, long story short, went back to teaching. Grace had lifted. It didn't feel right anymore. I knew God wasn't calling me to that. And at the same time, our current kids pastor kept kind of nudging and saying, hey, I'd love to have you on the team. So I ended up jumping on staff with our kids ministry, started doing curriculum, elementary curriculum, and then all of the curriculum, and couldn't stop. I had the burden for the next generation, and I was like, I have some skills. I know we can make this better.
Yep.
And somehow in that whole process, through, lots of growth, and, our church was growing super fast, lots of locations, and just a huge blessing to see how God has used Radiant to impact the city. I just kept leaning into the opportunities that God gave me, and it's really cool to look back and see how what I thought was my plan in life was very different, but God was preparing me to be able to use those skills here in kids ministry to impact the next generation. So, so that's kind of it. I ended up here. I love it. Yeah, and I've been in my role as the central kids pastor for 3 full years.
Okay.
And kind of I was on staff and everything. I was the central kids director, elementary director, some different positions, but I've been fully running with the role for 3 years now.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a crazy story. It does always amaze me how people wind up in kids ministry. It's always like a little unconventional, but also like I love what you said of like, it's such you can see God's handiwork in it all because he is preparing his people, and all the certifications that you have, all of your knowledge through teaching, like, does really come in handy when you are in the kids ministry world. And so it's true.
Yes.
Like, God was preparing you this whole time for you to end up at Radiant Church. And so give us a little bit of information on Radiant Church. How many campuses do they have? What does your team look like? Just like flyover view of the church as a whole.
Yeah, so Radiant Church, we're in the Tampa Bay area. We currently have, we always figure out like the online thing. So we have 10 locations and we're launching our 11th, so nine physical, and our 10th physical location is launching at the end of August. And so I've been a part of, when we moved down here, we had just, my husband helped launch their 3rd location. And then I came on staff for the 4th location and helped with that. And then between launching and relaunching, going from like portable to permanent, I personally launched 6 locations.
Wow.
Which has been a blast. So yeah, we have all these locations across Tampa Bay, very different, all Tampa Bay, but, some are more rural, suburban, urban, lots of different demographics. And so it's been a lot of fun to figure out like how do we make it feel and look and have the vision of Radiant Church across these locations, but still be able to give, the autonomy at the location to really be able to serve the people who are in front of them.
Yeah.
So my role, I'm the Central Kids Pastor, so kind of the vision and leadership of our kids ministry across our locations. We have a kids director. So I know every structure is a little different from multi-site. We have a kids director at every location. Some of them are part-time, some of them are full-time, depending on the size and the needs of the location. We have a couple portable locations still that are in high schools where it's set up and tear down. We've been blessed to be able to get some properties lately, so we have 3 portables right now. The rest are permanent.
Wow.
So we've had some just crazy miracle deals where, different churches and pastors have come to us and loved what Radiant's doing and have been able to we've been able to partner to say, hey, we want the legacy of this church to live on. Yeah. So we've done some church mergers through that and gotten buildings, which is amazing. And so then we have a kids director at every location, and then we have our central team. And so on our central team, we have 3 people who are designated just to Central that I help oversee, and they are, all things curriculum. We have curriculum that goes to all of the locations. We're very much a centralized model where my philosophy is I want everything that is the same at all locations to be taken care of by Central, and we try to give them all of the curriculum, the supplies. Like we even have if they need diapers, we have an order for them and it gets shipped to or dropped off at their location every couple of weeks. All of those kind of things are all centralized. We handle that. Child dedication, baptism, a lot of that are like central systems that they then at the location they operate in. And so, so there's all of, that all goes on. And then we are working on right now building our own curriculum. We've kind of toyed with that in the past, but we are now building our own elementary curriculum. So that'll be starting this August, which we're very, very excited about.
That's so fun.
And so building that for our kids, but then also hoping to be able to share that with other churches too. So we're working on what that all looks like.
That is so exciting. Okay.
Yeah.
There's so much. I have so many questions. My brain is like spinning a little bit. Let's back up to you're launching your 10th physical location in a couple months.
Yeah.
There are a lot of churches who are in similar spots. It may not be their 10th location, but maybe it's their first location. Or maybe a church is just sending a church plant. And all of the things, there's a lot of things that have to happen. There's a lot of steps that need to be taken as far as finding a leader. But then also there's a lot of things that are just kids ministry specific to when it comes to launching a campus. So give us a little insight onto what that process has looked like as you guys have launched your 10th physical location. Because by now, I'm assuming it's kind of maybe a little bit easier than that 3rd and 4th launch, but I'm sure it comes with its own unique challenges based on where you're going to be and if it's set up and tear down, if it's a permanent location, all of those variables. But walk us through, like, what are some things that you think about? What are some of those details that maybe, as you've done this a couple times, often get overlooked? And what are some of those non-negotiables that are like, well, these, in order to launch for a kids ministry, XYZ has to happen?
Yes. Great question. Yeah. So as we've launched all these locations, you'd think, I was kind of laughing as you asked the question, because you'd think it gets easier, and it does get easier. You know what to look for, and, that checklist as you're walking through a location to see if it works. It gets easier, but it's always different. So our central team, we always laugh because every time we go into a launch, we're like, you'd think we would know what we're doing by now. And we do. We've grown so much and we've learned so much. There's a level of wisdom that comes with, the experience.
Right.
But it's always, every location is different. So there's different models of church planting. There's, the Life Church model is very much like they have their building. And so there's a lot more predictability and control of what that's going to look like. Our model has been a little bit different in that, property in Tampa is very difficult to find. It's very expensive. The real estate market is wild. So we have, Pastor Aaron, our lead pastor, is incredible. And he leads the charge of, we want to be able to reach people where they're at right now. We don't want to have to wait till, we have the perfect building and all of the funds to be able to build the perfect building. So we go in a little bit different than some churches, and we say, how can we get in as a stage one to start reaching people where they're at now, and then be able to scale that. And hopefully there is, a whole building, and, whether it's going from portable to permanent or building a building, we have that in the future, but we want to reach people now where they're at. So when we go into a location, some of the things we think about is team is number one. In kids ministry, our volunteers are, we can't have a ministry without volunteers. So the first thing that we're doing is we're trying to see who at our current locations is ready to be sent out, who, kind of lives close to that area that we're going to be launching in, whether it's a tap on the shoulder or they've been looking for more leadership. We've even launched where we ask people who, they are our people, they've been serving, they know our culture, they love our kids. And we'll ask them, hey, can you do 3 months at this new location just to set the culture, to set them up for success? And then be able to hand that off to the people who then start to attend that church and jump on our teams, and then can take over from there. So team is number one. Finding the right person to lead that location. We have adjusted that model multiple times. I wish we had it all figured out, but there's some times where it's like we have the perfect person who's at a nearby location who is ready to be a kids director and lead the charge. Other times, like our current location that we're launching is about an hour away from it's over an hour away from our main location. Oh. And and so that's been one where we're like, hey, we really don't have a huge group of volunteers who live in that area, and we really want somebody long-term who is part of that community. So what we've done we're doing it for this location, and we did it for our last location, is somebody from our central team who knows how our ministry runs, knows what it takes to have a healthy ministry. She's launching the location as the kids director. And so, there's a commitment there of saying, hey, she's going to drive there. She's going to be part of that for the goal is about, from launch season and then about 3 months afterwards. But we found that to be super successful in creating a really good foundation, helping to raise up leaders and build a really healthy volunteer team. And then she knows who to look for to see who's going to be our good leaders at that location to be able to hold on to it long term. So
and she can pass the baton almost to be like, hey,
exactly,
let me help you. And then, but it's also I love that model because it's not like, oh, let me help you get started and then I'm out. It's like, no,
right,
I'm still central. I'm still here. You can ask me questions. Like, I want to help you succeed. And what a beautiful model of raising up a new leader or a young leader to really take over, but also feel so supported in the process.
Yes. Yeah. We found through the, ups and downs, just learning as we have grown so fast that, it's one thing to be able to lead a kids ministry and care for those volunteers and care for those families and pastor them. It's a whole nother thing to launch a location and just work through, what we've learned is when we launch a location, we launch it with 80% of the details figured out, and 20% is always going to be like, as you get in there and there's actual people and kids and, you see the flow of the hallways of drop off and pick up and, check in, check out and all of that. You start to realize what we, thought was going to be a great plan actually needs to be adjusted because people are people. And so it's been nice to be able to say, hey, we've got central support there who have experience. They have the perspective of all of our locations to get them, set up for success, and then be able to hand it off kind of streamlined and maintainable at that point. So yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah. As far as like safety things, though, I think that's where like we have like a checklist now when we go to locations, because sometimes we'll be like, hey, we have an opportunity to, be at this location. So I've got a general checklist of things to look for, like making sure that we can secure the kids' space. We've been in lots of buildings, or even like high school cafeterias are some of the hardest locations to secure because they're like in the middle of a building. Yeah. So trying to make sure that like, hey, we have to be aware of security and making sure we can secure our kids' space, that we have, or being able, we're very flexible in that there's sometimes we can't close a door, but we know that going into this, we're going to have an extra safety person or paid security officer standing at that doorway. So we need to know that going into the expenses of the location. Bathrooms are like, that's probably the hardest thing, especially in either older buildings that we go into or portable locations, because if we're in a high school, middle school, the bathrooms aren't always where we want them to be. And we need close bathrooms for those, potty training toddlers. So that's very important and not an afterthought. And then kid spaces. So we generally, our model, and it's kind of different than some others, when we do a portable location or we're launching a location, we're looking for 4 age groups. So we have our babies, we call them our dreamers at our location. So dreamers, which is our babies and 1-year-olds, so infants and ones. We have explorers, which is our toddlers, so 2s and 3s. We have heroes, which is our preschool and kindergarten kiddos. And then we have elementary, which is 1st through 5th grade. So we're looking for 4 designated spaces. But we have noted, at some of our locations we've learned, and we'll kind of know the area, that if it's very suburban, we're going to have a lot more families, and we have to work through those percentages, looking at about 20% of our overall attendance is going to be kids. Then we have to adjust and say, if they're one of the buildings that we're launching into, the space that we have for our babies is small, but we have another space that we could use, so we're splitting that age group, so we'll have 2 rooms for that age group. So
there's lot of like an option for growth there. It feels like this building, this church could really launch well because we're in this neighborhood, or there's not a church in this amount of radius to where all these people are. And for you to say, okay, there's 4 age groups, but then is there another one that we could open up shortly after we launch? That's good to think about.
Yes. Yeah. And that's been, I am very blessed to have an amazing lead pastor, and I get to sit on the our central leadership team. And so that's something that when we're talking about launching locations and all of that, then I can advocate for, our families and say, hey, this is what's going to make a great family ministry, great ministry for our kids. Here's the amount of space that we're going to need. And sometimes it's, hey, we can't do that right now, but now we have a plan in place, and we have that in front of us to say, we know that after a couple months of launching our location and being there, we're probably going to need to take the step 2 of adding another classroom or getting, whatever that is. So that's something, I'm Enneagram 1. I want everything to be perfect from the beginning. I want to do it right. I have learned to say, sometimes it's not going to happen right now, but that doesn't mean that doesn't need to be heard, and that we need to, have a plan in place to get to that point in the future. Yeah.
No, that's really helpful. I want to go back to talk about volunteers, because sending volunteers to a new campus can be very sad and very hard. Like it is, to send volunteers to another campus, not only are you losing team members, but most of the time you're losing your best team members.
Yes. Yeah.
And to whether it's, I'm sure you've sent people from like your main campus or all the other campuses, depending on where they are located in the Tampa area. But it is like this, well, I don't want to send my best large group teacher. I don't want to send my best small group leaders. I want them to stay with me. And and so how have you helped your kids ministry team have this mentality of we're always building our teams because we always are sending teams. We're always sending people. We're always in this mentality of living sent. And that means we're saying what I've heard and I've often used of like that gospel goodbye of like, you are going to advance the gospel in another part of our city. And that means you're not going to be with us on Sunday mornings. And so how have you worked through that as you've launched all these campuses? How have you prepared your volunteers at each of your current locations? And how have you kind of like, we're always building, we're always rebuilding, we're always sending people, we're always filling holes. Like, what does that look like amongst your kids team?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, and that's something that comes up, every so often where, we do have a new location that's launching. And, well, just recently we had a launch meeting for our newest location. And you see in pictures and our kids directors are like, oh, somebody from my team was at the interest meeting and they haven't talked to me about that yet.
You're like, no, don't
go. It makes it a little awkward. Yeah. Like, okay, this is great. But the really cool thing is that, number one, we're a sending church. Like we know that the mission of our church, and not all churches are like that. Like that's the vision of our church is that we are growing and we want to be able to reach more people in Tampa Bay. We want a church in everybody's neighborhood. And so that's just in front of us all the time. That's what we talk about. It's Matthew 28:19. Like we want to go and make disciples of all nations. And for us, we say our part of the nation that we've been stewarded that God has given us is Tampa Bay. And so we want to make sure that every child in the Tampa Bay area has the opportunity to know Jesus. And we want that to be a great representation, which means we need great volunteers to be able to be in front of them. So I think a lot of it as a leader, it's me being very, to me, like in my mind, I'm like, I feel like we talk about this all the time, but we can't talk about it enough. We always have to be talking about how, we want to advance the gospel. We want to make disciples. And so that means we have to be able to be okay, living with open hands and releasing those volunteers to the next location if that's where they feel called. The other part is, we work really hard on our leadership pipeline with the idea that we're never, there's never going to be stability on our volunteer team. And that's okay. That's, expected. And so, and so we're never going to have that stability. And so we always want to be looking and saying who else could be a leader. In our model, we have, we call our volunteers, like our entry-level volunteers, our dream team. And then we have team leads who are over that specific service time in that classroom. So, like our 9 a.m. Elementary lead. And then we have our coach who is over that age group at the location. And then we've got our director. And so we've got that pipeline of leadership development. And so it's always looking and saying, who else can you be developing? We talk with our kids directors that we always, as a kids director, want to have a number 2, who is your Timothy, that, Paul to Timothy relationship of who's your Timothy that you're raising up, whether that's somebody who is going to go into ministry someday as a career and go into vocational ministry, or just somebody that you can be pouring into and can be a really great blessing to the families and the kids at your location right now. We always want to have that number 2 to be raising up and discipling the next person. And so we do that with all the way down. We do that as, I'm doing that with somebody on my team. Our kids directors are doing that with somebody at their location. And then each of the coaches, and they're modeling that and saying, hey, if you're a coach, you're the coach right now, but we want to make sure that if there's somebody else who is raising up, that we, we get ourselves out of the way and we are open to wherever God's calling us next and allowing the next person to step into that role. So I think that culture has helped, so that way when we are launching a new location, and whether that's, for a kids director role or just volunteers, it's, we're ready to send those people out knowing that yes, it's going to hurt for a minute when that person goes and you have this incredible person. We see this all the time. There's all of a sudden this big hole where we've got these really big shoes to fill. And it takes a little bit of a learning curve for that next person to step in and kind of pick it up and learn it and, all of that. But every single time God has been faithful and he brings the right person. We just had an example at one of our locations where two core people, there's a husband and wife team who were part of our one of our locations. They were coaches on our team, and they ended up going to another location that was closer to their house when that opened up. And it was that moment of like, what are we going to do? They have been like, they launched the location. They've been a crucial part of that team. So they, the kids director there is a moment of like, okay, I know this is okay. It's, God's going to provide. It's going to be all right. They went over there, and immediately two people who were on the team under those two coaches were able to step up into leadership who didn't have the opportunity when the coaches were there. And now they've been able to take those teams to the next level in a way that the other leaders couldn't, which is okay. So I think as a leader, it's one, for me, I've got to continue to speak that over our team and remind them how faithful God is, remind them of the vision of our ministry, and then just help to, when they are, as a kids director or kids pastor, when you're at a location and, you feel the weight of that planning center and scheduling every Sunday, it's just helping to brainstorm and say, okay, maybe there's somebody that can step in who's not in that age group, but can step in this week, or kind of thinking outside the box. Maybe there's a leader at your location who isn't somebody that wants to work with babies, but they're a really great leader of leaders, and they can help grow that team and grow the culture and the, recruit some people for that baby team to then be able to hand it over. Yeah. But that little bit of time of putting a great leader and that really influential person at your location in that position can help to take you to the next level.
Yeah. That's so encouraging, and that's so helpful to think through not only the leadership pipeline that you shared of just the mindset of like, no, we're always talking about this. Like us as a team, this is at the forefront of our conversations. We're talking about it with volunteers. We're casting vision for why this is the mission of our church and why we believe that being a sending church is important. And so it's almost like, well, your volunteer team kind of should know, like, they should know that this is going to happen and that people are going to be sent and people are going to go to another location. And so I think it's helpful to have these conversations all the time so that people aren't surprised when it's like, wait, why are these people going? And why are you asking somebody else to step into their shoes? It's like, no, because this is what it's like. This is what being a sending church and going out into other cities who don't have churches in their neighborhood, like this is what it costs. And this is both the hard things and the good things of sending new leaders to make a greater impact, but also raising up new leaders and strengthening their leadership gifting so that they can also make a greater impact. And so it's both of those things.
Yeah. Well, it's celebrating that too. It's, we, all the time, if somebody wants to go to another location, it's, we're sad to see you leave because we love you and you've made, a huge impact and we're friends, but like, we can still be friends, but we're going to celebrate you, going where God's calling you to. And so we always think of it of like, with missionaries, if somebody came to us and said, hey, I feel called to, go to Africa, go to Kenya and go be a missionary, we would celebrate that and we'd be so excited about that. But for some reason, when it's, I feel called to go a couple of neighborhoods over, one city over, all of a sudden it seems weird and like, you're leaving my church or what does this look like? And so I think it just keeping that mindset that like, hey, we are missionaries, but sometimes we're in our own backyard, that we're going to be missionaries here where we're at because God has called us here and we're being obedient to whatever God calls us to, whether that's, across the seas or here.
Yeah, exactly. And and I'm curious if you guys have had this conversation as a kids team, but I remember being on a multi-site church staff and we launched another campus, or it was like a merge of some sort, and a lot of my team left. And there's almost this sense of competition. Like that can easily creep in of like, well, our campus has more kids, or our campus has more like of these volunteers, or now like, how have you navigated kind of maybe those tensions amongst your team? And because that is obviously like a lie that leaders should not believe, is like, oh, well, that church is going to be better, even if it's your same, it's your same church. It's not like a totally different church, but even then, there should not be a competitive nature. But in the world of, one, a fallen world, but two, just it can be really easy to be competitive with your other locations of like, well, this church just launched and they have a nice building and I'm still portable and I'm still set up and tear down, or they have more kids and I like all of those silly things that sometimes I feel like the enemy really likes to sneak in to the way that we think and how that plays out. Have you guys navigated any of that? Like, how do you kind of like take that head on and say, hey, no, this is not a part of our culture. We're going to celebrate even when we're sending a set of volunteers down the street or to the next city. And we're not going to say, oh, I can't believe you're leaving. Like, I just feel like sometimes there can be this really negative, even when it's joking, even when it's like, oh, we don't want to lose you, or like, I'm going to be so sad, or what would I do without you? Like, all of those are very well-intentioned, but sometimes it can be not helpful in the mission and vision of sending people out. Yeah, we've definitely had to work through that. We have one location now where they are portable, and they're one of our newer locations too. They're about a year and a half, maybe two, I think a year and a half old now. And one of our other locations went from portable to permanent, got a building, and they're literally like not too far away from them. And so they did have some people who left that location to go to the permanent location because it was actually closer to their home now that they moved up into that area. And so that was hard because you've got, a church, a brand new church location that's still trying to grow. And now it's kind of got people who are being pulled to another location. And so that's something that we, just have to lean into a lot. And what we've learned over time is that every location is different. They have different challenges and they have different strengths. And so it's leaning into that and knowing that, yes, we have 10 locations, but every single one of those 10 locations is vastly different. And so it's not cookie cutter. We've got to work through, and I do a lot of coaching of like, hey, this is an asset that you have. This is a strength that you have. So lean all into that other locations don't have. So it's just trying to figure out like, when it's, in our multi-site model, our, the framework of how we do kids ministry, how our curriculum looks, how we handle our safety standards, how we, we structure our volunteers and our leadership pipeline, that's all the same. But how you care for people, how you recruit, how you develop, how you engage with your families is going to be different depending on where you're at. And you have a different calling in the community you're at. So, having a more, inner city kind of location, you're going to be caring for families in a different way than, our very suburban families where, it's a different demographic. It's a different group of people, and the families need different things. And so that's okay. So that's, just one of those things that we constantly have to watch. And a lot of it comes from like, hey, we are like at Radiant, we are one church in multiple locations. So it's not like, it's one person's winning and one's not. It's we all are one church and we want all of us to succeed in the way that God gave us to be able to succeed. So yeah, it's definitely a challenge and something we have to watch, but, it's just a tension to manage. It's not something that's going to be solved. And it's just a conversation to have with those directors when they are feeling that. Most of the time, just doing a little reset of, hey, here's the strengths. And we do a lot of like, the cool thing is because we have so many locations and we have all these kids directors, we have the collaboration to be able to come together and celebrate what somebody, one kids director, like they may not have that many kids compared to the other location, but they're able to lean into families in a way that others aren't. And so we celebrate that. Another location might have a ton of kids and they have to manage the flow and, the volume of families, but they do that really well. So
so we celebrate that. And I just try to be very aware of that as a leader, to point out the strengths so we can all get better, based on, their unique challenges that they have.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a tension that we have to manage, and it all comes back to the vision of our church and, why we do what we do. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. That was probably one of my favorite things with being on a multi-site church staff, was having a team. I had always been the sole kids director, and I didn't have this like built-in team of some of the greatest encouragers and the people who I know are praying for me and the people who I know can celebrate me or celebrate with me. And that changed the game for my ministry and the way that I did things, and the collaboration piece was just like, it was probably one of my favorite aspects about being on a multi-site team. And that it does come into play. It's like when you are feeling sad or bummed out or frustrated about a family leaving or whatever, like you can go to your fellow directors and be like, man, I'm feeling this way. And then they can be the ones to remind you of the mission and vision and the truth that's found in God's word. And that it matters. Like, it's a fun aspect that multi-site churches get to be a part of, that I'm like, gosh, I wish everybody had this, because it's so cool and just so really helpful.
Yeah. And I will say, with one of the other things that I've had to learn as a leader is, in the beginning, when I jumped into this role and was very new to it, I had very big vision. And when we launched the church, like when we started to go multi-site, there's very much the idea that our broadcast location, our main location, was kind of like, they piloted everything, they kind of set the standard, and then everybody else at the other locations was supposed to replicate that. And what we realized over time was that that was putting a level of pressure on our kids directors that wasn't realistic, because here you had a location who had been there for quite a few, a couple of years, has had some longevity. There are broadcast locations, so the volume of people and the volume of volunteers is much higher than a church plant that, a brand new launch who is just trying to get, figure it out in a location. And so what I had to do, because I would cast this great vision of, here's the expectations, here's what we want to do, here's what our kids ministry looks like, and our poor kids directors would just be like, I see all those things, I don't know how to get there. So we've got the vision way up here, they're down at the bottom, and they don't see the steps to be able to get to that point. And so it could be very discouraging of, okay, this person's killing it over here, but I don't even know how to, schedule somebody on Sunday. Let's start with square one. So what I had to do, I really self-reflected. I'm like, how do we fix this with keeping, a level of excellence? We want excellent kids ministry. And I don't want us to just be executing the ministry, but actually having effective ministry where our kids are growing in their relationship with Christ. And so what I did was we worked through something called our tiers. And so we kind of looked and said, as we launch a location, we launch at tier 1. And so that kind of helps build the building block that's kind of at the bottom of tier 1 of launching a kids ministry encompasses these things. It's very safety focused. It's very much, let's build our beginning volunteer base. Let's, have a very, super aware, when parents are dropping off, we want to engage with families and really care and be very relational with those couple, those initial families who are coming to our church, and we want to steward them super well. So very much tier 1 is just the first building block of having a great ministry. And if you hit those, that level, you're succeeding. So that way the kids director who's launching that location and is just tier 1, they're not worried about all of these crazy kids worship and, all of these family events and all of this that can feel overwhelming. It's, hey, let's spend some time building a really healthy ministry. Then once we have some very clear markers of goals that they have to hit, then they get to go up to tier 2, which is a lot more of the leadership development and being able to hand off some of the ministry to your leaders and delegate and empower them to own parts of the ministry, a little bit more family engagement, all of that. And then when they hit that, now they get to move up to tier 3, and it keeps going on from there, where at every stage we have amazing curriculum happening. We have, every kid is learning about Jesus in all of those tiers, but the the level of depth that we can go into in family engagement and leadership development and the growth of those teams is going to change as they grow in their own maturity as a director. So that's been something that we did to kind of combat some of the, jealousy and comparison that was happening of, that's not possible at my location, and it is at that location. And we've also then kind of grouped them together, so that way when they're talking and trying to get feedback from people, they might go, if they're at a tier 1 and they want to be at a tier 2, they might talk to a tier 2 kids director and say, hey, how did you get here, or give me some feedback as I try to build this area. And it helps with my coaching too, and our campus pastors or location pastors to know how to set goals that are realistic and help to build the ministry instead of, we can be giving them all kinds of crazy goals that actually don't. They might push numbers, and we're pushing that. One of the big things that we've had to work through is, yes, we want our ministry to grow and healthy things grow, and so we want to see those kids' numbers growing.
Right.
But that's not the end all, because there's some locations that just because of, God, we have a lot of people coming through, and there's a lot of like marketing and things like that where people will come and check us out. But if those kids don't have a healthy ministry to be a part of, and they're not building relationships, and they don't have amazing volunteers who are ready to pour into them, then they don't stay. And that's the worst thing that can happen. So, so that's where we've really focused on health first, and then we can focus on the other things that actually grow our numbers, because we want healthy things to grow.
Yes. And healthy things grow. That's so smart. And that's and I think your tier mentality and your tier model, I think I could see that really helping with burnout.
Yes.
Because I think if you launched a campus and we're like, here's all the things that you have to do. You have to run this event and this family thing and this Sunday morning thing and all of these XYZ things, but they just have to work on building volunteer teams. Like, they're not to that level yet. But then if you're not acknowledging where they currently are, then like you said, the pressure on the kids directors to do X, Y, and Z, not only from central perspective, but from their campus pastor perspective. And then they're working 60 hours a week to get to those levels that they're not there yet. And then that ultimately leads to burnout in leaders, but also burnout in volunteers. And so I love the tier model, because you're paying attention to, okay, where are you at right now? And you have measurable things that they need to accomplish. You need to have, like, I can imagine, like, you need to have X amount of dream team members or X amount of people who are interested in being the team leads, and like all of those kinds of steps that I can imagine just make the kids director know what to focus on.
Yes. Yeah, because in kids ministry, there's a million things that we could be doing.
Yes.
It's, you're running a whole church behind the scenes, and, it's, there's a worship component, there's curriculum, there's, training and safety, and, you actually want to care for people and care for your families at the same time too. So there's it's never ending. The list of the to-do list that a kids director, a kids pastor has going in their mind never ends. Yeah. But what I found is it's really helpful if we can say, okay, baby steps. Like, let's think through what creates a healthy ministry. What goals do you have, and what's our next step at that location to be able to grow that ministry and make it healthy? And so let's put that on paper. Let's clearly identify what that is, whether it's, hey, we need to make sure the base level is we need 2 adults in every classroom. Let's make sure that every service we have 2 adults in every classroom. Then it's, okay, now let's start to develop these leadership layers and, having a good rotation of volunteers. And we kind of build it so it's, okay, let me take the next step. Let me not look at, the 10 years down the line where I wish our ministry could be, but let's see what I do for the next 3 months, the next 6 months, the next year, and then we'll continue to grow there. And if we're really faithful with those little steps, just like God told, if we are faithful with a little, He entrusts us with a lot. And so what I found is if, we can just keep taking those baby steps and trust that God will take care of the rest, then those are the ministries that grow, super fast, because they've been able to set it up and be faithful with, doing the legwork to build a healthy ministry.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, I'm going to ask you this question because I think you would know based on being married to someone in the production world. What do you launch with tech-wise for kids ministry?
Ooh, Oh, great question. So, yes, my husband Sam and I have worked together a lot on this. We've researched a lot of churches, and then, it's always the comparison part of church ministry can get really crazy, but you always have to work with what budget you have.
Yep.
And so what we've done is, because we are a church that is launching locations and we want to have the margin to be able to grow, we've tried to figure out a system that is, stewards the finances that we have, that is lean on the budget, but still has a big bang for the buck, and engages our kids. So what we have done at our locations is kind of twofold, but they're pretty similar. So, we use a computer. We call it, we use these little Nooks, N-U-K, are the computers that we use.
Oh.
They're just, he would know more about it than me. There's little computers that have a great hard drive, and, they can do all the things that we need to keep up with ProPresenter and all of that. And so they have a computer for every classroom at every location. And that runs our ProPresenter, and they, it connects to the screens and all of that. So we've got our TVs. Some of our locations have 2 TVs. Our production, like the value of the production experience varies.
I'm sure some are like on
location.
rolling carts.
Yeah.
Like
We've got at our portables.
Down.
They roll their big, those big carts that have the carpet on them and everything. And, and so they've got the TVs, but it's the same. We have learned that it is much easier to manage the technology centrally if everything is consistent, because then we know, what it is. If one of the computers has an issue and it goes bad, we send it back to central, and they've got extra parts to be able to switch that out and turn it around for the next week. So we use all the same computers, same, the keyboards that we use for that are all the same. Everything technology-wise is the same across the locations to make it easier to replace and manage. We use ProPresenter for all of our, all of our experiences, and our central team does that completely. So our central team takes all of the. So central team builds out the ProPresenters, and this was something that was a learning curve in the beginning, but building it all out, very systematic. We have little tricks that we've learned over time, whatever the graphic is on the screen for that part of the lesson matches the part of the lesson plan. So it's very easy, it looks like this, it looks like this, which makes it easier for our volunteers. So they build out the whole flow. They've got the, pre-service music built into that. Literally everything technology and experience-wise is built into that ProPresenter. They save it out, and it goes into a Google Drive, and then we have a shared Google Drive that all of the locations are able to load. We have created systems of, as we've grown, we need to make sure that we have those ProPresenters available to our locations early enough so they can load it and make sure it works before showing up the next Sunday. So our plan is always that the Sunday before the new month, they can load all of their ProPresenter files for the next month.
Nice.
So they have everything loaded. So our central team works really hard to make sure they have all the details. They test it a million times to make sure that, when they zip it and send it to the locations, it actually opens. All of those little things. And they use, so Google Drive is synced on all those computers. Wi-Fi is always something we have to watch. That is another thing when we're going into a location, checking internet. And making sure that we have great internet, or we have a plan in place. If, sometimes our high schools are goofy with internet, especially over the summer. They tend to just not want to have internet, or not fix it if it goes out.
They're like, we don't need it. Nobody's here.
We're
just going to turn it off.
So we have, he set up, we've got T-Mobile hotspots that we have available at those locations as backup. All of that, but we have found that loading all of those files once a month and having it all set definitely helps with, internet issues and all of that.
That's awesome. Just those things. I feel like technology is one of those things that people often miss, and they forget of we need to figure out a way to do, or they don't put in the budget of we're going to need a computer, and we're going to need a monitor, and we're going to need all these things. And so sometimes it just gets skipped. And so it's helpful to think through, okay, what are we going to launch with? What do we need to launch with tech-wise? And so it's important to think through. All right, Delia, the last question I always ask is, if you were talking to someone brand new in kids ministry, what would be your words of encouragement or advice?
Ooh, good one. Okay, so the one that I would say, anybody who's going into kids ministry, you have to listen to the voice of God. Remember that he has called you in this season to this place for a reason. And you own that.
Yeah.
And so I think comparison in kids ministry can become, it can really stifle your ministry, because there are incredible ministries out there. And I personally am very competitive. And so I want to have the best ministry because I want to give the best to our kids. Yeah. And so it can almost, if you're looking around, get resources, get ideas from other churches, but they have different, again, just like when we're talking about multi-site, they have different challenges and different strengths that you don't have, but God put you in that seat to lead and be the visionary for your ministry, whether that's of a multi-site model, whether that's at one location, whatever that is, God has put you there for a reason. So, be a learner and research and, reach out to other kids ministry leaders. That was something that when I got into the kids ministry world, I was like, I've seen kids ministry. I've been part of churches and part of ministries, but like leading in kids ministry, I'm like, I have no clue. Yeah. And so I was so appreciative of the different kids pastors, kids ministry leaders that I would just email or DM on Instagram and ask a question, and they would respond like immediately. And so now I hope to be that person too. Our team laughs all the time that people will reach out and they're like, hey, how do you do this? Or you seem like you're doing such a great job with this. And we're like, great. Yeah. We're just, hacking through it like everybody else and trying to do the best for our kids. So, but I think big words of wisdom are just know your kids, know your families, and, just steward that season well of doing what needs to be done at your church to build your ministry. Don't try to copy and paste somebody else's ministry, because it won't work. Yeah. It could be the best ministry, the best structure, the best model in the world, but if it doesn't work for your families and your kids, it's not effective. And we want effective ministry, not efficient ministry. So yeah.
That's so awesome. Delia, thanks so much for being on the podcast today. I think this is going to be incredibly helpful just to all sorts of people that are working at multi-site churches, thinking about it, planning for it, preparing for it, all the things that happen inside church ministry. And so I'm grateful to know you and get to know your team and kind of watch from afar all the incredible things that you guys are doing down in Tampa. And it's going to be great. It's just a fun thing to follow. So thanks again so much for being on the podcast. And we'll link as much as I can in the show notes. So even those little computers, I'm going to see if I can find them.
Yeah.
And link those because those can be helpful. But thanks again. I totally appreciate it.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. This has been so much fun.
Yes.